As per my NDA, I am not allowed to discuss this position with former employers. Since my firing is effective immediately, you are now a former employer. Gather round as I tell you the story of the time I got fired at the worst place I have ever worked. From day one, it was a nightmare. There was zero onboarding or training. I was simply given the login info for a couple of different websites and told to get to work. This company planned large conferences and I was in charge of speaker coordination. I was the only person in this role. The information solely resided with me. Not a big deal, I say to myself. I'm good at thinking on my feet. I'll just ask questions when I need clarification on something. That turned out to be impossible. My manager's first language wasn't English. I'm all for learning new languages. I think it's a great skill to have and it takes a lot of work, and being able to speak multiple languages is impressive. The problem was that her English was so poor that it was often very hard to understand what she was trying to say. I once asked if she had time to hop on a call and explain something to me and she responded with no cran. Self-skills are a must. I am bird without head. It took me a few days to figure out that she was trying to say that things were hectic. She was running around like a chicken with its head cut off, and she needed me to be self-sufficient. Regardless, I did my best in the position. Small mistakes happened here and there, but overall, all the speakers were very happy and felt well supported. I struggled on the communication with my manager, but I thought the company was happy with my work, until 4 months in when I was randomly pulled into a meeting with my manager, HR, and legal. Effective immediately, I was fired. I asked why I was being fired and why this was the first I had heard of any problems. Why wasn't there a write-up or a verbal warning? My manager said it was because the 10 minutes I ran the analytics it takes me to respond to an email was too slow. That was a bullshit reason and we all knew it. If you don't like me personally, fine, but don't try and make this seem like I was a bad employee. To be honest, I was furious. We do the exit interview with HR and then she asks me to send over any documents I had. We worked on personal computers remotely, and describe where I was at in regards to our next event and our speakers. NDAs are really common in this field. I've signed one at every job I've ever worked, but this employer's NDA had a clause in it that worked to my advantage. I said, as per my NDA, I am not to discuss intimate details or share documents relating to this position with any employer, past or future. Since this firing was effective immediately, you are now a former employer and I am bound by my NDA. HR hemmed and hawed a little bit, telling me that of course I could speak to them about it. This was about their event. I pulled out my copy of the NDA, always save contracts, and pointed out the exact clause and said that it clearly stated that if I violated this NDA I would be sued, so no, I couldn't talk to them about the position. HR turned to legal and legal pointed out that I was technically correct. They were a former employer and I was bound by my NDA. They fired me 17 days before the event. They didn't have time to start over from scratch. I still keep in contact with some of my co-workers and apparently the event was a shit show and manager nearly lost her job because of it. Over half the speakers pulled out once communication broke down, all because I take too long to respond to emails. Now to the comments. An acquaintance of mine got out of his non-compete with a trick like this. A couple months after quitting he gets a call from his former employer, asking if he could pretty please help out one of their customers. No, he says. I've got 10 months left on my non-compete. They offer to hire him back as a contractor to do the work. My lawyer informs me that would also run afoul of the non-compete. I may be contracting for you, but I'm employing myself. After a little posturing back and forth while he played scared of a lawsuit, he got them to release him from it, in writing. They were hella surprised when the client cancelled their service contract, having hired him full-time. They were hella surprised when the client cancelled their service contract, having hired him full-time. Oh, that's delicious. Even without the NDA, if I were fired effective immediately, that means my job no longer is paying me to answer such questions, so I have zero obligation to answer them. You fired me and now you want me to finish doing my job for free? Yup. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. My contract rate for question answering is $200 an hour, with a 40-hour minimum. Let me know if you'd like to proceed. You know what seals that? Let me know if you'd like to proceed. Manager nearly lost her job because of it. Well, that's very disappointing. Sterling work yourself, though. I'm sure the only reason they hung on in the short run is they were short-staffed after firing OP. A eviler company would have let go of OP after the event. 17 days is not enough to onboard a replacement. Everyone involved in this decision messed up. 17 days is not enough to onboard a replacement. Sounds like OP had already done most if not all of the work he/she needed to do, and they figured that if he/she gave all the details to them they'd be able to figure out the rest. It's why they asked him/her for the documents as well as a summary of where they were at, so, no replacement would have been needed until after the next event. So, OP really ducked them over. And was justified in doing so. OP also said that there was next to no onboarding or training, so they probably planned to grab some other poor bastard, shunt them into the same role, and then fire them just as they were getting the hang of things. Or maybe there was other shit going on behind the scenes. Reminded me of a non-compete clause our software engineers had to sign back in the 80s that stated they could not work for a competitor or start a business doing the same work within a 100-mile radius. Mike M quit and started his own business doing software. Got sued. Went to court. His lawyer said, "Judge, the non-compete does not specify the center of the radius." And judgment for Mike. Okay, that got a chuckle from me. Can only imagine where the 100-mile radius could be. Perhaps. Clearly this can only refer to Babylon, the center of civilization. My SO's former employer tried to pull the reverse on us. The employer had paid for his graduate program in exchange for his working for them for 5 years. They fired him after 4.5 years and said he still owed them money for the tuition since he didn't uphold his end of the contract. When he asked for a copy of the contract, they said they couldn't share confidential files with people who weren't employees, so no, they would not send him his own contract that he signed because he was no longer an employee. We eventually worked it all out with the help of a legal representative. Basically, we wrote the former employer a letter stating that we had a lawyer and they backed down. But please always keep a copy of any contract you sign. It could save your butt. How is it confidential if you're the other party the contract pertains to? Sounds like they were trying to bluff, which would also explain them backing down as soon as they heard lawyer. Yes, that's exactly what it was. They attempted to bully the OP, hoping they would be too stupid to know their rights, too stupid or too lazy to seek legal counsel. HR turned to legal and legal pointed out that I was technically correct. They were a former employer and I was bound by my NDA. That's ducking great that their own legal team backed you up. I wouldn't be surprised if the contract was drawn up by HR and not legal, so this was legal's way of getting back at them just a little. I think legal drew it up but probably never thought about someone using the NDA part instantly, lol. Ah, technically correct. The best kind of correct. The life of a bureaucrat is one filled with rules, petty revenge, and a surprising amount of limbo. Jamaican limbo. Definitely a BS reason. Is the email response time documented somewhere, or is that just an arbitrary reason? You might be able to sue, but then again, not worth the time and energy. OP replied. No response time requirements listed anywhere. It's 100% a BS reason. When I pressed them on it and asked for documentation, because I had proof that nearly every email sent during business hours got a response in under 10 minutes. They said proof didn't matter and I was being fired no matter what. The language barrier between me and my manager led to a lot of miscommunications and lots of "can you clarify what you mean?" response emails. I think she just got annoyed and thought I was being intentionally dumb. The thing is, what could possibly be so urgent? A response in 10 minutes or less is needed, or the norm. Bravo for being able to prove you can and did that, but this is crazy. Pro level MC though. Well done. Next time I have to postpone a meeting because of multiple conflicting schedules, I'll say no cran. Self skills are a must. I am bird without head. I have never signed a single NDA. I was in one job where I worked for them for 2 years before they discovered I had never signed the NDA. They said if I didn't sign it, they would have to take disciplinary action, which could mean termination. I said, well, what's your choice? I'm not signing it. They all looked at me like I was crazy. They then said, we will need to discuss this in private. 20 minutes later they came out and said I could go back to work. They never had a policy in place that said I had to sign it. This was the same with all their new hire paperwork, so they couldn't really do anything to force me to sign or punish me if I didn't. That was pretty much how it was with all the companies I have worked with. I can top that. They gave me the NDA plus non-compete and left the room while I read it. I hand-edited it, crossing out or changing terms that I disagreed with and initialing. When I was satisfied, I signed it. The HR lady checked the last page to see my signature and date and went to stick it in the file. I asked for a copy and she ran it through the copier and handed me what came out without ever looking at it. Nothing ever came up and I guess we will never know if anyone ever noticed. Reminds me of the story about the Russian guy, who got an offer for a credit card, changed the contract to say there was no interest or fees, mailed it and got the credit card. After they tried to sue him, I recall the judge sided with the guy.